And yes, indeed. Welcome back to session 6 of 6 of our Becoming a Microsoft Azure Administrator seminar. Welcome if you're new to the series. Welcome if you've been along for the ride the whole trip or partly, whatever the case may be. It's all done now except for the last stretch, which is Azure Administration Skills Development Certification. As usual, I'll present for 55 minutes, after which I'll answer all of your questions. So I want to echo what Alyssa said. Make sure that you're taking advantage of the Q&A panel, especially to follow up about the YouTube. I actually forgot that we're hosting these videos in the Pluralsight YouTube channel as kind of a waypoint. Eventually, they'll all be stored in the Pluralsight library, but the good part there is my understanding is that the seminars will always be in front of the firewall, so you don't have to have a paid subscription. They'll always be free. Well, our agenda for today is, first of all, making sure you understand with crystal clarity how the Microsoft role-based certifications work, specifically paying attention to Azure Administrator. And I know we've talked about that transition from AZ 103 to AZ 104, but we'll drill into that to great depth today. I want to make sure you're comfortable with the different types of items or questions you'll see on the exam. I've got lots of helpful tips, tricks, and strategies. You also should know about the online testing process, because if your Pearson VUE Testing Center isn't open yet, the only other option you've got actually is the online. I have to say that the first couple times I used online testing, admittedly, it was a number of years ago, I didn't have a great experience. So even though here in Nashville, Tennessee, the testing center I go to, it leaves a little bit of room to be improved. I've now, over the last few months, been doing all of my exams online, and I'm a big fan of the Pearson OnView engine, and I'm going to show you with screenshots how that entire process works. And then, of course, there's finalizing your Cert study strategy. So yeah, there's a lot to cover in 52, 53 minutes, so let's get right into it. Recall that this seminar series as a whole is about the Azure Administrator job role, and we began way back when in session 1 on shifting your paradigm. This is particularly important for those of you who have got experience as an administrator in local data center environment, and how to start to shift your outlook toward more of a cloud orientation. The next 3 sessions were about different aspects of the Azure cloud. We started with IaaS, Infrastructure as a Service. Then we looked at platform services, and in session 4, Azure DevOps. And in last week's session, we looked at skills development in terms of figuring out what your best learning style is, how do you learn most efficiently, and just all of that kind of stuff. And today, of course, we're doing certification. If you've been with us before, you know where the session materials are. The short link is timw.info/admin. And that's just going to simply take you out to one of my GitHub repos where you can download all of the slide decks. I share them all in PDF format, as well as any other like links lists, or there may be some other doodads in there, but principally it's a PDF version of the different slide decks. All right, so let's get right into the content here. First, making sure we understand Azure role-based certification. Now, if it's been a while since you've been in the Microsoft certification arena, you might remember something like what you're seeing on your screen now, where it used to be before these role-based badges came about a couple years ago, a year and a half ago, you would earn a Microsoft certification and you'd receive in the mail, although I think eventually Microsoft Worldwide Learning stopped auto-shipping the certificates. But the end of the story is you'd have a frameable certificate that I used to put on my office wall, and that's how you documented your proficiency. Of course, some weaknesses there are, number one, there wasn't any concrete validation unless maybe you, in addition, shared your official transcript with your client, potential employer, whomever. But number two, this particular certificate that you see on the screen was called the Microsoft Certified Solutions Expert in Cloud Platform. So in other words, there was a single certification for all of Azure, which if you know anything about Azure, it's almost laughable when you think about it, because in order to earn this MCSE, you had to qualify as a developer, as a systems administrator, and as an architect, which is not very feasible for most people, it seems to me. So for that reason and a whole bunch of others, excuse me, worldwide learning shifted to a role-based approach. And specifically, the job role we've been concerned with is Azure Administrator. And I've got some other slides that show the certification program, but this particular one shows you the badge. And the badge conveys some really nice advantages. Firstly, the fact that whoever needs to validate that you have the badge can do so in their web browser in a way that's very similar to how an SSL TLS digital certificate is verified. Here we go. Microsoft Learning has some posters that you can download in PDF format. In the lower left of the slide's an attribution, timw.info/RBC. And this one I like because it drills in specifically on what Microsoft calls their apps and infrastructure paths. So these are just traditional IT job roles. Starting at the left, you see we've got fundamentals. That's the AZ900 Azure Fundamentals. And you know that 900 series actually goes beyond apps and infrastructure. If you go to the Microsoft Learning website and look up all of their role-based certs, there's now fundamentals certs for AI. There's Microsoft 365 platform. The idea is that the 900 series, although it might strike you like it did me a little counterintuitively, 900, in college, the 101 is the beginner course, but whatever. The 900 series are the fundamentals where there's no prerequisite of any kind, and it's a good place to get started. The associate level is where we really branch out into most of the different job roles. Azure Administrator Associate, Azure Developer Associate, there's Security Engineer Associate. There's a whole bunch of them that we can take a look at together or you can look at on your own. This picture is actually out of date. You might notice in dead center here where it says AZ100 and AZ. Don't pay attention to the numbers here so much. Just look at the general trend from fundamentals to associate to expert. Nowadays, of course, you take just a single exam to earn your Azure Administrator. Same with Azure Developer. And then there's a smaller set of expert level certifications. There's Azure Solutions Architect and DevOps Engineer. And of those, the DevOps is the only exam, the only certification badge that does have a formal prerequisite. Don't get thrown off by the white dotted lines you see. Those aren't prerequisites at all. Those are just potential paths that you can take. The solid line denotes, and even that's a bit misleading, the fact that in order to earn your DevOps Engineer badge, you have to pass AZ400, that's the DevOps test. But you also have to hold either the Azure Administrator or the Azure Developer. It's not both, it's either one. The idea is if you're more of an infrastructure person, you'd go with Administrator. If you're more of a programmer or software developer, you would do Azure Developer Associate. You see the general pattern? This text is coming from the AZ104 exam page, and I liked it because it gives you Microsoft's perspective of what the Azure Administrator is. I'll just call out the highlighted text. We're implementing, managing, and monitoring infrastructure in Azure. So those are really the core action verbs that we're concerned with. I would also, deployment, I guess, would fit in with implementing. Notice that there's not so much on design. That would be architect. Notice that there's not developing, that's administrator. Notice that it does it mention security? No, it doesn't mention security. So Worldwide Learning had kind of a rough start a little over a year ago with the V1 of all of these badges, simply because they had a huge volume of work to do in a condensed time horizon. But now we see as the exams and these programs mature a little bit more, Worldwide Learning is gradually honing and refining, and that's what we have here. So there's far less overlap than there used to be with these different Azure job roles. Now, how does this fit into the real world? I'm going to go back to what I told you at the beginning of session 1. In the real world, I found it's not quite a wild, wild west, but the chances are pretty good that you'll be doing more than, strictly speaking, a single role in Azure. It depends on some factors, but that's what I've observed anyway. So in the second paragraph, we've got some aspects of Azure: identity, governance, storage, compute, and networking, right? And then the last paragraph talks about what you should have by way of experience. Now, notable is that there's no hard prerequisite. You could take the exam tomorrow with no experience at all in Azure. I mean, that's just a business decision. Microsoft, this is a for-profit enterprise from Microsoft's perspective. But it says that you should have at least 6 months of hands-on experience administering Azure, and then notably, look at that last bit. PowerShell, Azure CLI, Azure Portal, as well as Azure Resource Manager templates. So worldwide learning means every word of this, like I say, just like a very important tip for your exam success is to put weight on every word. In an exam question, every word is carefully chosen. You're going to find that there's not any fluff. There shouldn't be any extraneous information on these exams. Every word counts, and your selecting the correct answer in many cases depends on your understanding just those words. Don't read anything else into it at all. Now, the blueprint or the skills list for the exam is technically called an objective domain, or OD. And I'm actually going to jump out to demo here because I made you something. I made you a present. And that is this right here, if I can click over to it. I've taken all of the objective domain contents for AZ-104. I'm not doing 103, the 104, which is what I call the V2 of the Azure Administrator exam, excuse me. And I've broken it out here into Excel Online. And you can download this file. You won't have read access, but you won't have write access, but you certainly have read access. You can grab a copy or just use the copy directly in the browser. But as you can see here, I've taken the levels of the objective domain. The first levels are called functional groups. And then the next level are your objectives. And then ultimately you get down to skills. So I've broken this out in a way that's very granular. And I find personally this helps me, excuse the scrolling here, I guess I'll just stay here for a moment, because you will see at least a passing reference to every item on that skill list. You might think, well, does Microsoft really want me to know all of these? Yeah, it's not like that. You may not necessarily get an entire question devoted to, say, configuring Azure AD Join, but you may see a reference to it in a case study. You see, it'll be in there somewhere. It reminds me of the old Prego pasta sauce commercial. It's in there. It will be in there. And by having all of the skills broken out into different rows here, I was trying to scroll over to the next column. What you could do is challenge yourself by scheduling the exam now as quickly as you can. Think about reasonably how much time you want to devote. I mean, that period is going to be totally up to your availability, your willingness, your motivation, your existing skill set. But then work backwards on your calendar and plug in dates on each of these rows. That way you can ensure that you've given yourself enough time between when you register and then when you actually take the exam, that by the end of that period, you've gone through every line item here. And that's going to put you, I think, in a good position. Now, how do you get this file? You're probably looking in the URL and you see this GUID. You don't want to copy that down. I made a short link, and that is right here in the left corner of the slide, timw.info/AZ104SG. If I can remember, let me put it down in my notes to share it on my Twitter feed after we finish today as well. So I'll have share AZ104 Excel sheet on Twitter. Okay. All righty. This is a guide that I wrote for Pluralsight a few weeks ago. It's called A Brief Introduction to the Microsoft Azure Role-Based Certifications. You can consider this guide to be a Cliff Notes, if you're familiar with those, or just a summary of what we're talking about today. That's timw.info/AZG, just for your reference. Some various points to ponder concerning the Azure Administrator skill set. As we know, AZ-104, what I call the V2 or the current version of the exams, the latest version, it's currently in beta and it's still in beta. I heard from a learner yesterday that they weren't able to get the 80% discount. I don't know if that's the case. Let's do a search for exam AZ-104. Here's the situation with beta exams. The biggest point that you need to remember is that you're not going to get your score report immediately, and that can cause issues. If you need to document, like I actually was asked the other day by a client if I have such and so a cert. And I told them, I said, well, it's in beta, so even if I pass it, I won't know necessarily for weeks or months. You see what I mean? And that can be, it's a sticking point. So what's in it for you taking the beta? Well, normally Microsoft gives you an 80% discount on the registration cost, but there's a catch to that. They normally don't do it for the whole run of the beta. There's stuff behind the scenes we don't need to get into, but bottom line is Worldwide Learning needs a certain number of registrations to have a statistically significant sample size. Say that 5 times quickly. So they can judge what items are best to put in the generally released version of the exam. And so the 80% discount is nothing more than an incentive for people to register. So keep that in mind about that. Now, when is this supposed to come out of beta? Let me see, I've got some dates here. The 103 exam is currently set to retire on or around August 31st. And what's today? I have to check, June 17th by my watch. So it's still a little while, isn't it? So there's an important question for you of whether you want to do 103 or 104. To be totally candid with you, you know what I would do? I'd do 103. Why? Because you get the immediate results, which is a good thing. Number 2, there's a plethora, if you don't mind the term, of study materials already available. We've got the AZ-103 Skill Path and Role IQ at Pluralsight, for example. And it takes a while for content creators to catch up when there is an exam revision. Now, about the performance-based items, I'll have more to say about that as we go along. I don't know. I haven't heard anything NDA or not. Of course, I wouldn't share if I learned something NDA, but I haven't heard anything official about the status of performance-based labs on the exams. Unofficially and anecdotally, they appear to have been turned off. Whether that's due to COVID or not, again, Worldwide Learning has been totally silent about that, unfortunately. So let's get in now into the different types of questions that you'll see on the exam. Now look in the lower left here, I've got an attribution to where I got these screenshots. These screenshots are not from live Microsoft exams. Microsoft Learning made a long time ago, they made a demo application that you could start on your computer just to give you a feel. I wish they still had one available, actually, that gave you a feel for the different types of items that they ask. And they made little videos on their YouTube channel. That attribution URI, timw.info/MSYT, will take you to the Microsoft Learning YouTube. And if you do a search in there for like multiple choice, you can find them. They're just like 60-second videos. And I'm hopefully going to deliver more value than those do. Those just describe how they work. I'm going to give you some strategy. So number 1, these aren't real exam content. Number 2, don't pay attention to the content. Just look at the structure, because the structure that I'm showing you in the screenshots is quite similar to what you'll see on your real Microsoft exams. So let me get my drawing tool at the ready here. First of all, the point of multiple choice, there's 2 types of those. There's single answer multiple choice, which have the radio buttons, and then there's the multiple answer multiple choice that have the check boxes. Some things to know about this is that there's lots of good validation built into the exam engine, such that if it's a multiple answer multiple choice and it says choose 2 and you try to choose 3, the exam will stop you. Or if it's choose 2 and you choose 1 and then hit the next button, the exam will put up a modal dialog saying, hey, so it'll help you not make those kind of human error problems is what I'm trying to say. Let me see, let me go to the next screen here. Yeah, so this is showing, like I said, the multiple answer, multiple choice. Another thing you should know is that Microsoft Learning does give you partial credit. So if you have a choose 2 and you're entirely sure of one of your choices, but your other choice you're not so sure of, even if that's incorrect, it's not like you lose credit for the whole item. There is partial credit. Third, I want you to take comfort in the fact that you won't see choose all that apply. I always couldn't stand those. I thought those were borderline unfair. On the Microsoft exam, the multiple answer, multiple choice items will always say, what are 2 ways to do this? Choose 2, choose 3. Sometimes they'll even go further and say that the 2 choices represent independent solutions, or sometimes it's choose 2 or choose 3 that are all components of a single solution. Once again, the reminder there, your guidance, pay attention to every word in the item stem. The item stem is the actual body of the question. And you're going to find that the questions are very terse, and that's a good thing. In other words, you're not going to have to read a wall of text. There'll be like 1 or 2 sentences to set up a scenario, 1 or 2 sentences that represent a problem. There's going to be a solution statement. You need to do such and so. And then there's the actual question. What do you need to do? Which to? Blah, blah, blah. You see? Okay, another newer item type that I couldn't get a screenshot for is repeated scenario. And these come in groups of maybe 2 to 4. The thing about these is that you can't move between them. Normally, through most of the exam, you can jump back and forth. You can skip an item and come back to it if you want to. These come in a block and you cannot navigate back. So you need to make sure that you answer it the first time through. The reason for that should become obvious in just a second. What you've got here is the same situation spread across multiple items. You need to move an Azure VM to another host. The solution will be different for each of the members of the set, and your answer is whether the solution meets the goal. You see, so here it says you redeploy. Next item, it might say you do something else. And to avoid you using deductive reasoning to try to get them all correct, that's why you can't move among them. You'll see a number of interactive items, not just on Azure Administrator, but all of these items apply to all of the Azure exams, with the possible exception of fundamentals, because fundamentals is a shorter test than all of the rest. It's 60 minutes instead of 2.5 hours, and it has fewer questions, etc., etc. But for our administrator work together, pay close attention. This is called the select in place, also called drag and drop. The things I want to call out to you here are these ellipses that you see are actually split bars. And depending on the size of your monitor, you may not be seeing the entire item, and the exam engine will not warn you of that. So you want to make darn sure that you can see the full item stem and you can see all of the possible choices that you would drag from the one side of the screen over into the other. Very important point. So that's a pro tip. Try to take the exam on as large of a monitor as you can. With online testing, I strongly suggest you use a laptop, and generally speaking, laptops don't have jumbo screens. So to that point, I would suggest that you plan on using those split bars to make sure that you can see everything. That's the biggest tip I have for you here. Build lists, these can be challenging because they're like 2 items in one. And normally what they're used for is to test that you know how to perform a procedure in a sequence. And in the administrator skill set, for sure, there's stuff that you have to do in a particular order. For example, if you've ever heard of Azure File Sync, in Azure File Sync, you have to create the sync service before you create the sync group, and you need the sync group in place before you can do your endpoints. You see what I mean? So it'll be that kind of thing, where you're asked to select n number of items and drag them over. And then once you've selected n number of items, you reorder them so that they're in the correct order. You can either use your mouse or you can use these buttons to click. Again, the point here is that you do get partial credit, so don't let this bust your morale if you come to one of these and you're thinking, oh brother, I don't know what the heck's going on here. Do your very best. Never ever leave an item unanswered. The engine will let you do that, unfortunately. You'll see a review screen and it'll show you with these great big tiles, number of questions answered, number of questions unanswered. Even if it looks in a worst case scenario that you're not going to be able to complete all the items in your allotted time, just do a blind guess because it's better than nothing. Active screen, the way that these will manifest on the Azure exams is a bit different. It used to be more like what you're seeing here, like this is from a SharePoint server sample exam where they show part of an interface, a management interface. And these controls actually work. So the checkbox actually allows you to tick it or not. These drop-down list boxes allow you to actually use them. And the Azure exams, this tends to be a good place for asking you about code. So you may see JSON. For Azure Administrator, it might be an Azure policy definition. It might very well be a resource manager template, a deployment template. It could be a PowerShell script file or even an Azure CLI script file. And you'll find that there's periodically a drop-down list where part of a command or a parameter is. So this speaks to my guidance that you should have intermediate level PowerShell and intermediate level experience parsing JSON, because you're going to see a lot of it on the exam. I would say if you're almost intermediate with Azure CLI, you should be good. But PowerShell historically has been the order of the day on these exams, although I've heard reports that we're seeing more and more Azure CLI. So I say intermediate because you're going to be asked to interpret the JSON or the Azure PowerShell or the Azure CLI. You won't have to write any code from a blank screen, but you absolutely need to be able to read through code blocks and understand what's going on, because you may be asked detailed questions of what the implications of that code are, beyond just filling in the blanks, you see. Yeah, and this is one of those where it shows you some code, and then you have some yes, no responses. These statements, blah, 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 isn't what you'd see on the live exam, but you'll be said that in this code, you'll be able to do blah, or this code prevents blah, and you just have to think critically. I think it's good. I mean, these are all ways ultimately to validate to Microsoft that you understand how to use the technology. That's what it really comes down to. I personally disagree with case studies being on non-architect exams, but Worldwide Learning never asked me, I'm afraid. So you should expect, be happy if you don't see, but expect to see at least one case study. And this is a test inside of a test, or a testlet as it's called. So you've got the main line of the exam, the trunk line of the exam, where you're going through 1, 2, 3, etc. When you come to a case study, you're actually dipped into it like this, and it's not timed separately. That's another pro tip you need to understand. You get your time limit, and that timer stays on screen throughout the whole exam session. And the components like case studies are not individually timed, all right? And while you're in the case, you move around it, and then when you exit the case, you can't come back. So you need to give it your best effort immediately. You can go between the different components of the case. There'll normally be 3, 4, 5 tabs. It's going to be some fictional company where they have some use case in Azure. And you'll find in almost all cases, the cases are centered around a theme. So rather than get hung up on trying to memorize the case, don't waste time doing that. Instead, I suggest you skim the case. A lot of those tabs are just a bullet list of points. It's not like a Reddit post where there's a wall of text with no paragraph breaks. You're going to find that most of those tabs are just bullet points. Skim through, look for keywords, look for a theme. Okay, looks like this one's predominantly about migration. It looks like this one here is centering mostly on deployment and automation. And that'll get your mind thinking along those tracks. Then there's going to be a subset of 3 to 7 or so questions that all point back to the case. The questions are normally very brief. Just you need to solve the connectivity issue. And you need to think to yourself by going back to the case, find where that bullet point is that talks about the connectivity issue, and then come back to the item. And it's kind of like you're putting a puzzle piece together, that the question is missing a piece that you have to pluck from the case. And once you fill in that piece, it's just another question. So please don't be over intimidated by these case studies. Lastly, and this is a terrible screenshot, but at least gives you the general idea, the performance-based labs, and I've heard rumors, as I said, that these have been turned off in order to save Azure capacity for paying customers given the pandemic. I've also heard rumors that they're turned off just because of problems, which, I mean, Microsoft has been trying to do hands-on items almost as long as I've been in the industry. I remember in 1999, I was taking an Internet Information Server exam, and that, I think, was the first Microsoft exam that had a simulation component. So it was a mock-up of the IIS console, and some parts of it you'd click and nothing would happen because they only coded in to simulate certain parts that went with the lab. But the way that the performance-based labs historically have worked on Azure Administrator is that, kind of like the case study, you're going along the main body of the exam, and then you go into a performance-based lab, you come out and you can't return. You've got your screen split. It normally takes, I've seen it take from maybe 45 seconds to spin up the virtual machine that you're connected to, upwards to almost 10 in one case. That was a scary day. But the screen splits to where you've got an RDP session going on the left side of the screen, and on the right, you've got a punch list of tasks. And there's a button here to reveal your credentials. Of course, make sure you sign into the Azure portal with those credentials because those map to your exam session. And these tasks are independent. There's no dependencies among them. So you could start with 4 and then go up to 1, go down to 7, whatever. And they're marked, you can mark them off with a little checkbox control. And these are just relatively brief tasks to verify that you know how to accomplish these different things. Like maybe you need, it might say something like, configure such and so storage account so it doesn't permanently delete blobs. It's not going to tell you exactly what you need to do, but it's going to tell you which resource you need to configure, and then it's going to use not vague terminology, but different terminology from what the feature is called. Of course, in the example I just gave, it would be soft delete. So you would know, okay, they're asking me to turn on soft delete for the storage account. So you can jet on over. They've got the all resources view visible right on the dashboard. You can complete these tasks either using the portal, or you can actually open Cloud Shell and use Azure PowerShell or Azure CLI. Remember, under the hood, it's all JSON. And my understanding is that Worldwide Learning captures the results of your lab, captures the JSON, and does give you partial credit for whatever you've done during that lab session. Last thing I want to say about performance-based labs is if it has you deploy something, all you have to do is make sure that it validates. So let's say that you get a question that says, create a public-facing load balancer. And when you get to that last screen, you do create, and you see that it passes validation and the deployment's continuing. Don't sit there and wait for it to finish. You do not need to do that. All you need to do is make sure that your deployment or your change validates and it was taken, it was accepted, then you're good. This is important. And it's actually an important incentive for you to consider taking the exam sooner rather than later, because if it is true that the performance-based labs are still turned off, you can take advantage of all that time you would have spent completing those labs and devote it to the rest of the exam. I actually surfaced that to Worldwide Learning. I said, could you consider that an unfair advantage? Because when I took the test, I had 2.5 hours and I had to complete my labs. My learners who are taking it this month, let's say, don't see those labs, never got a response. How about the online testing process? When it's time for you to register, what do? Well, you go to the AZ-104 page, or AZ-103, it's the same thing, and you've got your exam scheduler right here, and I'm going to briefly walk you through this process and pay particular attention to the online testing protocol. And the screenshot is showing another exam because when I was creating the screenshots, Microsoft won't let you register for an exam you've already passed. So I chose one I haven't taken yet. Once you go down the scheduler, you'll want to choose the bottom option unless you're a Microsoft employee, or if you've attended the Ignite conference last year, you'd get a voucher. I think those were supposed to expire after 180 days, but I've heard that they're still valid. But in all other cases, you'll choose the bottom option here where it says continue scheduling exam. Pearson VUE is the partner that Microsoft uses to deliver the actual exams. And you'll want to make sure to choose at my home or office for your destination. And notice there's a run pre-check. I wouldn't bother doing the pre-check immediately, but absolutely you're going to want to run that pre-check at least once prior to your exam day. More on that in a moment. You got to agree to the policies, no surprise there. Language, straightforward. Exam detail, I guess I took a picture of every screen. If you choose the online proctored, you choose the proctored language. Interestingly, at least for this exam, notice that only 2 languages are supported by the proctor. Hopefully for Azure Administrator, all 4, I think, languages that the exam has been localized into are available for proctor. I like the fact that you've generally, at least you used to have much wider flexibility in your appointment, as opposed to being subject to a physical testing center's hours. You could take the exam in the middle of the night, but I found that Pearson VUE has really changed this to where on this screenshot, notice that it starts at 4:30 a.m. local time, but it ends at like 4:30 p.m. So I don't know what they've got going on, and I think they're headquartered in New Jersey in the States, but they seem to have restricted their hours somewhat, which is a bummer. I liked taking the exams in the evening for various reasons, particularly because I felt that the wait time was significantly less than what you might get during business hours in the US. So anyway, you choose your date. I do know that Pearson VUE does not penalize you if you need to reschedule. I don't know if they ever did penalize you actually, but due to COVID, they explicitly say on their website that cancellations and reschedulings, there's not going to be any penalty for that. Before you check out, this is basically an advertisement. They're trying to sell you the measure up practice tests. I just click proceed to checkout. Again, you agree to policies, etc. And then this screen is important, not only for your payment method, but if you do have a voucher, this is where you would put that in. For example, I normally, because I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, I get a 75% discount. But if I have another voucher that's maybe 100% discount, you can remove any current vouchers and then add voucher or promo code. So that's just a tip if you already find that you're being subject to one voucher and you want to swap it out for another. Otherwise, you pay the full price per attempt, sadly. And then ultimately you submit your order, etc. And then, let's see, this is a page that I think you should bookmark here. I've given you a short link, timw.info/onView. This is a link to a page where you can do two very important things. Number one, as you see on the lower left, you can do your system test to make sure that not only your computer is compatible with the exam, but also your physical environment. And also, see step 3, you can log in when it's time to take your exam. You can do that from this landing page. Okay, what does the system test look like? The system test is exactly the same if you do it prior to exam day. It's the same procedure that you'll use when you actually are ready to take your exam. So that's another reason why I can't stress enough how important it is that you go through the system check at least once prior to your exam day. Pearson VUE created a piece of software called OnView. And as you see here, the first step of the test is you click copy access code. This is just a one-time code that corresponds with your individual session. And then you download the OnView client application. It's available for Windows and Mac OS. It looks exactly the same and runs precisely the same under both OSs. I've tested it because I have Windows and Mac systems. No Linux, I'm afraid, just Windows and Mac. And when you download it, it's like 70 megabytes. You're going to need some things in your general vicinity besides your computer. You're going to need your cell phone, and you'll need your wallet and your ID as well. So you'll have to be prepared. Okay, so you download the OnView client, you start it on your Windows or your Mac computer, you come to this screen, and the normal procedure is you put in your phone number, and then you're going to get an SMS text message on your phone that allows you to complete your check-in process, at least most of it. This screen tells us what you're going to do next. And this might seem cumbersome when you're looking at these screenshots, but I found that the first time through it might go a little longer, but certainly the second and subsequent times you can normally jet through this in like 2 or 3 minutes. It's not as cumbersome as you might think. I want to give Pearson VUE mad props for doing a great job on this OnView software. It's really nice, and it's a resilient piece of software as well. So as you see, there's going to be a system check, and then there's going to be some pictures that you need to take, and then you need to make sure that there's nothing running on your system besides the OnView application. The system check, as you can see here, is going to check your microphone to make sure that it can hear you. Best case scenario, in my opinion, is for you to be testing on a laptop and you've got an integrated webcam with an integrated microphone. I've never tried to use a headset, but I have heard from learners that the proctor wouldn't let them take the exam wearing a headset. And it makes sense because technically it would be possible for you to have somebody whispering in your ear through your headset. So I would say your laptop or desktop system with your webcam, and use the webcam microphone. Just say test 1, 2, 3. It just needs to get a signal. It doesn't have to be superb audio quality. The internet speed is documented on their site. I'll show you how to get to that site in just a moment. I don't know what the minimum bandwidth necessary is. And then for your webcam, it needs to be available on, and you need to be in the frame. And once you get 3 green checks, you're ready to proceed. As it says here, you'll then use your mobile phone to do your verification. And again, that'll come, I actually have pictures of that, come to think of it. Here we go. You'll get an SMS text message that says, click on this link, boom, proctorcam.com, and it maps specifically to your access code to your one-time session. And the first thing you'll be doing is taking a selfie. So you hit take your photo, it lights up, the app requests access to your phone. You take a selfie, you upload it, and then you do your identification. And depending on your issuing country, there's a number of different identification types. I use my US driver's license. And you'll need to take pictures of both the front and the back. So I just put the license on my table or desk and just take a picture of the front, upload, take a picture of the back, upload. Next, it's the workspace verification. And as it says on the right side of this slide, ensure you're not disturbed by anyone. If anybody walks in, the proctor's very likely to cancel your exam. So communicate with those who are in your office or home. Clear notes, note-taking boards and equipment, disconnect extra monitors, projectors, and TVs. If you're taking this on your office desk and you have a multi-monitor setup, you can only use your active monitor. Make sure the other ones are turned off, and depending on the proctor, they may require you to swivel them away 180 degrees. Food and smoking equipment out of sight, electronic devices, including your cell, are eventually going to need to be out of arm's reach. How does the proctor know this? Well, 2 ways. One, as I said, you'll be taking 4 photographs of your environment, straight ahead facing your computer, back, left, and right. Upload each of those photos. And again, it might seem cumbersome, but it actually goes pretty quickly, I found in my experience. And then once you've done that, you're ready to put your cell phone out of reach, and you're ready to continue with your exam. You come to this screen, which is, you really want to be ready. If you're doing this on exam day, at this point, you want to make sure that you're ready to take the test, because as it says, when you click next, any violation of these rules will result in your exam being revoked. So you select that you agree, and then it prompts you saying that if you do have any foreground applications running, make sure to close out of those. I did actually get prevented from going into my exam once on Windows and once on Mac OS. On Mac OS, it wouldn't let me go in because I had a background process running. It was a keyboard, like auto hotkey, a keystroke optimizer thing. Didn't like that. So the Pearson OnView client actually scans every process, and it must have a list of disallowed or suspect processes. And so I had to go into Activity Monitor right then and there. I killed that process, and then it let me proceed. On Windows, believe it or not, my Malwarebytes anti-malware client flagged OnView, and they said, nope, you're not going to be able to take the exam unless you stop this process. And, of course, there's a counterintuitive aspect here. You're not letting me take the exam because of your exam security, and my security application is flagging your security protocol. So I had to quit out of the Malwarebytes app, and then I was brought in. Long story short, the only foreground app that should be running at that point is OnView. And make sure in your notification area, close out of everything you possibly can on that system, even in the background, because the only process that needs to be active is the OnView client. And here's the screen where you're essentially in a waiting room, and hopefully you won't have to wait a long time for this. I've had really good luck over the last couple months. The shortest I've waited was like 15 seconds, and the longest I waited was probably 5 minutes. But issue here, as I said, is that you need to stay in that frame, in that webcam frame. If you leave the frame, you're liable to get the exam revoked. And at this point, the proctor will come in either on there's a text chat window, and he or she may also come in audibly. And next thing you know, the exam loads up and you take the exam, and from then on, it's just exactly like taking the exam at a testing center, okay? Assuming that you pass your AZ 103 or 104, I hope you do, you'll get your result immediately on screen, and then you close out of your on view, and then you're back on your computer. Then what, right? Did Microsoft actually receive the pass? That's a little bit nerve-wracking. Within an hour or so, you'll receive an email message that looks very much like the one that you see on the screen now, saying congratulations. And depending on whether this is your first certification, if it's your first certification, you'll be granted an MCID, a Microsoft Certification ID, that you'll carry with you through the rest of your career, and you'll be prompted to claim your badge. That will involve you getting access to your own certification dashboard at Microsoft.com. The URL is Microsoft.com/MCP. P is in Philip. And the badge claiming means that you'll create a free account at Acclaim. Acclaim.com is the digital credential provider that Microsoft uses. And so you're good to go at that point. It's a good feeling for sure. Now, let me see. The way the badges look in the web browser at the Acclaim website looks like this, and there's some things I want to call out here. Let's see, let me make sure, get my mouse on the right screen. Here we go. Number one, these badges are meant to be easily shareable. Microsoft Learning understands that the days of the certificate that's up on the wall are probably over with, and now you'll want to share your achievement on social media, on your digital CV or resume, whatever. I tend to share the public version of my badge link via email with those who need to see it. So infinitely shareable, and all of those share links are available through that share button. What else do we have on here? I keep losing my mouse. Validated skills. This is important because these are the discrete skills that Microsoft stands behind you in validating. So these would be excellent keywords to add, for instance, to your LinkedIn profile or to your CV resume. The badges are good with some exceptions, like I believe Azure Fundamentals has a lifetime active period, but the associate and experts do have a 2-year lifetime. So as you can see, my Azure Administrator badge is going to expire on the 30th of April of 2021. What does this mean? Well, it means that after 2 years, if you don't take action to renew, then the certification will be in an inactive state. You'll always have the badge, and you can always claim you have the badge. It's just effectively what will happen is that on your Microsoft transcript, there's an active section and an inactive section. It'll always be there, like I said. It's just a question of where it is on the transcript. Now, I wish I had better news about what do you need to do to refresh your badge. Microsoft Worldwide Learning has published absolutely nothing about the procedure for that. So your guess, honestly, I hate to say it, is as good as mine. I have talked to the leader of Worldwide Learning, and what he did say, and that I can repeat, is that they're working on it. And he understands that if your badge does expire before Worldwide Learning publishes the recertification guidance, they're not going to expire you. So don't worry about it too much at all. And he also said that he's going to make sure that there's plenty of time once they do publish their recertification guidance for anybody who is near expiration or past expiration. They have a fair amount of time to accomplish whatever it is. And again, I have no idea what the requirements will be. I've heard different stories, but it's not worth mentioning. So in our final 5 minutes before questions and answers, Cert Study Strategy. You might have seen this model before. It's how I like to approach any certification exam, where we're weighing and skilling up in 3 discrete areas: the theory of Microsoft Azure administration, the hands-on practical application of those skills, and then, never to be forgotten, test-taking skills. being familiar with computer-based testing, understanding the online testing process. We did quite a bit of that today for sure. Recall that Pluralsight has a partnership going with Microsoft, and there's a whole bunch of what we internally at Pluralsight call partnership courses that are available for free. These are great courses. A lot of my favorite colleagues, friends, fellow instructors contribute to this. The short link in the lower left corner, timw.info/AZ-free, is where you'll want to go to get involved. You can also directly from the Azure Docs page, we're in one of the menu structures. I don't remember. It's probably one that deals with learning. What do I recommend for quality practice exams? Well, if you have, I think you need to be part of an enterprise plan with Pluralsight. But we have a contract with Kaplan IT. Now I think they're called Cyber Vista. Originally, believe it or not, it used to be Transcender, and I worked for them and wrote exams for them in their glory days in the late 90s and early 2000s. Now it's Kaplan IT/Cyber Vista. But we've got those practice exams as part of certain subscription SKUs at Pluralsight. What's cool about the Kaplan practice exams, I know they have AZ 103, I don't know if they've published 104, is that it's going to be a good simulation of the live exam. And those practice exams, like other ones, like I would say Measure Up, this also applies to, they attempt to teach you something in addition to just, and you want to avoid the memorization. Memorization's not going to get you very far because I know, because they've told me at Microsoft that when they write those questions, they're written specifically to go higher up what's called Bloom's taxonomy, up above where you're just doing fact recall and memorization. So memorization will get you almost nowhere on these exams. Instead, we're looking at recalling, but then synthesizing knowledge. And how are you able to synthesize knowledge? Only after you've put in enough reps studying the theory, applying the practice with hands-on, and drilling in practice exams. So Kaplan IT Measure Up is actually Microsoft's official practice test provider. I know they're working on AZ 104. I'm not sure if it's published yet. And lastly, I think we've talked about them in the past. WizLabs is definitely an up-and-comer. Their price point is fantastic, and the quality of their stuff is pretty good. It's not as polished as Kaplan IT or Measure Up, but it's pretty decent. The downside, I would say, of WizLabs is that they don't have all of the different item types, like the ones we discussed, case studies, drag and drop, build list and reorder. You do get those with the Kaplan and the Measure Up. WizLabs, maybe eventually they're going to add it, I have no idea. But those are the three practice exam providers I would recommend wholeheartedly. And there's a screenshot from a representative Kaplan practice exam. And this one, obviously an interactive item where it's showing you some PowerShell code, and then you're having to sub out from a list of code blocks which ones are correct in that context. So what are your marching orders in closing? I want to repeat a subject that I opened up with you in session 5 last week. If you haven't performed a self-appraisal, please consider doing so. And it doesn't have to be anything formal or rigorous. I'm just talking about really looking at your interests, your professional passions, what you're good at, your aptitude, what your future goals are, and determine what is your Azure specialty. Maybe you might decide that you're more comfortable in another cloud, AWS, GCP, that's fine. But if it's Azure, where do you want to go? Is it administration? Well, there you go. What is your practice? What is your balance right now between theoretical and hands-on? Last week, I showed you lots of good ways to get hands-on experience with Azure. So if you weren't at session 5, make sure to review that session. And figuring out how you learn the best to be efficient. I mean, computer-based training like what we do at Pluralsight isn't for everyone. My wife would tell you directly, I'm sure, she really needs live interaction, not only with an instructor, but also with other peers in the class. But then again, you don't have to rely upon computer-based training for your whole study plan. You can get FaceTime, whether it's virtual or physical nowadays, it's probably virtual, by participating in community events, which we also discussed earlier in the series. Developing your study plan, I showed you how to make an outline using Excel. MS Learn, Pluralsight, different sources, and don't forget about practice exams. Find a delivery method for the exam that works. If you decide that you want to wait for Pearson VUE physical test centers to reopen, that's fine. That's absolutely your choice. Just make sure you're always prepared. Have your ID and everything on hand. Awesome sauce. Well, that's it as far as the content goes. I'm ready, if you are, to turn to questions and answers. Alyssa, any questions in the queue at this point?
Yep, we have about 8 right now, and we'll run through those really quickly. So the first one reads, I may have missed it, but is there anywhere that you can get the Excel document that Tim referenced? They're not seeing it on GitHub.
Right. I did mention it, but it was a while ago. Let me come out to that slide and let me show you. The Excel document, the short link is timw.info/AZ104SG. And hopefully that's an easy to remember address. AZ104 and SG stands for study guide. At least that's what I thought in my mind. So there you go with that.
Thanks. Next up, in the skill objectives, it seems that AZ103 and AZ300 are very similar. Can you go into the differences between the two tests?
Yeah, let me see here. Let me get my drawing tools. A big reason why we've got AZ104 instead of 103 is that degree of overlap that exists between the V1, the AZ103 exam, and also both of the V1 architecture exams, which are 300 and 301. And it's not in scope for this seminar series, but we've got AZ303 and 304 that are in the next generation of those. That overlap you can actually capitalize on now to your advantage before any of these V1 exams expire. I would put the degree of overlap between AZ103 and the Azure Architect V1s at upwards to 40% or more. I mean, it is significant. Thus, if you do clear AZ103 in the quite near future, you may very well want to capitalize on that forward momentum and certify with the architect exams. Or you could go, I'm drawing with my non-dominant hand, which explains why my handwriting is beyond awful, but I'm trying to draw 500, which is the security engineer. Again, I would say the overlap there is less 25%, 20 to 25%. But yeah, the overlap is a known issue, and you can, as I said, turn it to your advantage if you're willing to hustle a little bit more to take these exams before they expire. Because you should know that the Azure Administrator badge is exactly the same regardless of whether you take 103 or 104.
Next question. Are there any tips regarding the questions at the beginning of the exam that ask about your experience, beginner, moderate, expert? Do your answers have any bearing on the questions that the test engine presents to you?
Interesting question. I've never been asked that before. The answer, to the best of my understanding, is no. There's no link at all. And what the questioner is talking about, thanks for your question, is that when you start your session, you've got a pre-section where I think you have to actually answer them. I don't know if you can skip them. There'll be questions that, exactly as the questioner said, each of the questions is aligned to a functional group. It'll say, how much experience would you say you have with Manage Azure Identities and Governance? And it's like, no experience. I've done this a little bit, but I need help. No, that's just purely for Microsoft Worldwide Learning's psychometrician magic. No bearing on the exam at all.
Okay, thank you. And do you know, because I'm kind of curious as well, do you know if the tests are adaptive at all?
Right. No, I don't know for sure. Thinking about anything I've heard. No, I mean, Microsoft Learning experimented with adaptive testing a long, long time ago, like in the late 90s, early 2000s. And the idea with adaptive testing is that your exam may end after like 15 items if you've answered them all correctly. So you answer a question of mid difficulty, the engine recalculates and gives you progressively more difficult. And then if you miss them, it starts to step down. My understanding is that that is not the case with the exams, but that's proprietary information anyway. I wouldn't be able to share even if I did know, because it would be NDA. But my professional opinion is that that is not the case, that they're non-adaptive.
Okay. Next question is around how much time you would recommend to prepare for studying to take the AZ-103.
Yeah, that of course is a very difficult question to answer because there's a few variables at play. What is your current level of expertise with the subject matter, theory and practice? What is your current level of comfortability taking Microsoft certification exams or IT certification exams in general? How much time over the next, say, month do you have to spare to prepare to take the exam? You see what I mean? So it's impossible to give a directed answer. My best response is for you to do a self-appraisal, an honest self-appraisal of each of those factors. And this can be even more helpful if you've got the objective domain broken out into a spreadsheet like this, because you can essentially pick a date, a target date, maybe a month, month and a half, 2 months out, and then work backwards. You know, with Excel, you've got that autofill that can do all the date interpolation for you automatically. And that analysis I've actually used and found that to be really helpful in determining, you know, your time horizon. I hope that that response was helpful.
Yeah, I think so. Next question. For a proctored exam, how many forms of ID do you need to provide? In center tests, they used to need 2 forms of
Right,
ID.
exactly. Yeah, that's true. And I think that's still the case when you show up physically at a testing center. It's 2 forms of ID. But for the online testing, and I never thought about that until just now, it's just 1. So that's another reason why you'll want to go to the exam policies page. I have that in the slide deck somewhere where I give a link to the, here it is right here. Let me bring it back up. It's timw.info/onview. In this general vicinity, you can find all of the exam policies, and they'll give you a rundown of all of the IDs that they accept from all around the world. But it's just 1 single form, and I think that's a concession that Microsoft made because they've really done a lot of work with Pearson VUE to try to streamline the testing process, to maintain security as much as possible on one hand, but also to reduce friction on the test taker's part on the other.
Okay. Next up, is it possible to share multiple badges in a single share? That's sharing multiple badges at once from a site to LinkedIn or other social media.
Oh yeah, that's one of the things that I like the most about these badges. In fact, I'm going to show you my circa, oh my gosh, what happened? techtrainer.com. No, it's techtrainertim.com, my own personal website, which is about as low tech as you can get. It's circa 1998. But it speaks to your point of, yeah, you can absolutely embed those public links, let's say, and you can even download the images. Literally, all I did is I went to my page at Microsoft.com/MCP, because when you earn your first Microsoft badge, you'll get access to your own portal page, your dashboard. And one thing that I like about your dashboard is that your upcoming appointments, this is a convenient place to jump in. If you need to reschedule, cancel, or start a test, you can do it right from your dashboard page. But notice that you can get to your badges here, and you can download the images as well as get the code for the public URLs. And that's what I've done for all my badges here. So if I need a quick way to share my link with somebody is just to click out, grab the public URL, and I'll slam dunk this public URL into an email message, and away you go. And then whoever it is that needs to verify, this is a public unauthenticated page, they can hit verify, and like I said, it's similar to how SSL TLS certificates work. And whoever it is that's questioning whether you have the credential, they theoretically could contact Microsoft or Acclaim directly, and they would back you up that you do in fact have this badge and that you validated such and so skills. It's pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah, thanks for showing us how to do that. Our next question comes from someone who actually took the AZ 103 earlier this week, so that's awesome. They're asking, or they're saying the next should be AZ 400. Will they need to know programming or be a developer?
No, not necessarily. Remember that the point of these different exams is to reduce overlap and to have the job roles be discretely defined. So I have that DevOps engineer. And the way I describe the AZ400 exam is it's almost a product familiarity test. It's going to verify to Microsoft that you know how to use the Azure DevOps tools. So do you need to know programming? Absolutely not. You're not going to see any C# or Java source code whatsoever. However, you will see a lot of JSON, you will see Azure PowerShell, and you absolutely need to understand all of the components in Azure DevOps. Think of build and release pipelines, for instance. Absolutely, it goes into great depth there. But you're good to go. Congratulations on passing administrator. Once you pass your AZ400, then you'll have that DevOps engineer expert badge.
Thanks, Tim. Our next one wants to know if you have an opinion on whether one exam is more valuable than the other. So solution architect expert versus DevOps expert.
Right. Is one more valuable than the other? I'm a pretty practical, pragmatic person, to be honest with you. I think the most valuable badge is the one that you need. And you may or may not have a choice of which badge to earn. For instance, if you're looking to join a Microsoft partner organization, they need to have such and so number of certified professionals, in which case they might not care which one you have as long as you have a badge. You see what I mean? So that's an easy choice to make. As far as industry credibility, I mean, this is a sample size of one, of course, when you're looking at me, but I haven't seen any terrific difference in perception of those different levels, to be totally candid with you. Because it's an expert skill set, presumably it's more complicated than, say, the associate badges. But I don't know, the Azure Administrator, if I look at all of the Azure exams I've taken, I would probably rate the Administrator as the most technically difficult of them all, even beyond DevOps, AZ400, and even beyond Azure Architect, because the Administrator covers a lot of ground and it gets very deep, especially into networking, which historically I've experienced can be a trouble spot for a lot of people. And there's a lot of software-defined networking on the Azure Administrator exam. So really, kudos to anybody who gets through that test. It's pretty difficult.
Our next learner took the exam AZ900 last week. Good job, friend. At the end, they could not print their grade. Fortunately, they did pass, but the question is, how can they get results of their performance for each section at the end of the exam?
Oh my gosh, you're bringing up a really important point, because whereas when you're in a testing center, you'll leave with a printed score report that will in fact have your percentile of each of those functional groups. Come to think of it, I've never received one of those on any online exam that I've taken. My best advice to you is to open a support ticket. Now, would you open it with Microsoft or Pearson VUE for that? That's the question. Well, let me show you what I would do. If I was solving this question right now, I would do a search for Microsoft certification policies, and I would go to the certification exam policies and FAQs page, and I'm almost 100% sure there's a contact email on here. Let me do a search for
Oh, and
contact.
Tim, it looks like we have two learners who actually know the answer. So they said, one said you can download the scorecard from the dashboard, and the other said at microsoft.com/MCP, you can get view score report in the bottom right of the page.
Wow, I learned something new. Today I learned. Thank you for that, both of you. So there you go. I was going to have you go down the path of actually reaching out to Learning, and to their credit, they are, in my experience, they're quite responsive to test takers. But there you go. So it sounds like you log into your dashboard page. It's microsoft.com/MCP, and evidently you can drill in and get to your actual score report. Now, Do scores matter? I mean, that's another discussion we could have. How are we doing on time? Okay. I've never in 21 years been asked for my score. It's been a question of, do I hold such and so of a certification? Even on your Microsoft official transcript, it's not going to show scores. That's why it's never even crossed my mind. See, it'll show you on your transcript the exam and when you took it and what it's valid to, but no scores. But I'm going to do that after we finish today. Let me add that to my punch list here. Look up my score reports in the dashboard. Thanks for that tip. That's very curious indeed.
Yeah, definitely. Our next one wants to know, what if there's a blip in the internet connectivity in between while you're taking the exam? Does it resume automatically when connectivity resumes?
Yes and no. I say no because if you have a hard crash and let's say your whole system goes down, you should, and I have a high degree of confidence in saying this, be able to get back and pick up exactly where you left off. Pearson OnView has done a lot of work, I can't stress that enough, in making that OnView client app resilient. And I do have a lot of feedback I've received from test takers over the last year or so who have had that unfortunate occurrence. And what they told me was they got their system back up online, or in one case, I remember, she went to another computer and re-downloaded the OnView client and went through the whole intro thing again. Unfortunately had to go through the check-in thing again. But once they got reconnected to a live proctor, chances are it's not going to be the same proctor you had, but that's not a problem. And they can get you back into your exam session. And I heard from more than one learner who had a crash while they were in the performance-based lab, that the proctor was able to get them not only back into their exam session where all of their previous work was there, but the proctor put them right back into the lab session they were in, and the tasks that they had completed were still marked complete. You see what I mean? So I don't know what kind of checkpointing Pearson puts into that OnView client, but it's pretty darn good. I've actually heard of no cases of lost exam data in at least the last few months or longer.
Yeah, that sounds especially nifty and is a nice functionality that they put into that. Our next question reads, for the architect exam, if they pass one of the two, what will they receive from Microsoft?
Yeah, you do actually get a badge for every exam that you pass. So if we go back to my dashboard page, let's go to badges. And they just show up as a different color. Here we go. See, so there's 300 and 301. It doesn't matter which order you take these in, like if you were going to do architect, for instance, 300, 301, totally up to you. You do get the badge for each exam. And notice you can download the image and you can share the exam badges the same way that you can for the certification. However, you're not going to get the Azure Architect badge until you've passed the second of those two exams. Same thing with DevOps. You pass AZ400, you get the AZ400 badge. You have to clear either the administrator or the developer exam before you get your DevOps badge.
Okay, thank you. Next question reads, do you think there will be an Azure Network Engineer path in the future, or is there too much overlap with AZ103?
My knee-jerk response is that there would be too much overlap, that the administrator really sits squarely in compute, storage, and networking. So I would be surprised if they do that, but you never know. It's always worthwhile from time to time doing a search for Microsoft role, if I can type, role-based certifications. And if you head out to the Microsoft Learning page, they've got an Explore All link here. And it seems like there's new ones showing up every day. I think the most recent one I've seen is a 900 exam. Here it is, Microsoft Certified Azure AI Fundamentals. And you can either just browse through here, or you could use the selector up here to look at the different job roles. Look at this list. This has expanded significantly over the last year. Wow. There's even Microsoft Teams-oriented role-based certifications here. For the Dynamics exams, there's roles for those. Finance, that's also Microsoft Dynamics. A lot here. But being a networking person, I would personally have a lot of fun with networking. So I'd love it if Microsoft did that. But no, I think that's safely within the administrator job role.
Our next question reads, has Microsoft extended the 300 and 301 exam life due to COVID? Is there a concrete date of expiration?
Yeah, you can get the latest info along those lines by going to the appropriate exam page. So we can do that right here, as a matter of fact. If we look up exam AZ300, we're going to see right at the very top the latest information. A new version of the exam will be available. Okay, so it looks like the next generation of the architect exams isn't even in beta yet. So it says you'll be able to take this exam until it retires. Now, I think that originally these architect exams were supposed to end in August. So it looks like, I don't know what's accounting for the delay, but it looks like we've got some slippage here. So at least as of today, as of this session that we're together on June 17th, that the 300 and 301, I would imagine this also applies to exam AZ301, is that their lifetime has been extended a month. Yeah, September 30th. And I wouldn't be surprised if that gets pushed again. You know how projects work. There's two things you can count on: scope creep and slippage.
Our next question goes off of that one and kind of talks about if you pass AZ300 but time runs out on AZ301, so that one expires, can you still be an architect if you pass the new 304?
Yeah, I did. I got that directly from Microsoft Worldwide Learning, verification that you can, in fact, mix and match the V1 and V2s. So in your example, if you passed AZ300, you could then take 304. 303 is the next generation of AZ300, and 304 is the next generation of AZ301. And the reverse is true. If you took 301 first and passed that, and then the 300 expired, or retired, I guess, then you would do 303. Yeah, you can mix and match.
That was our last question. So this is the end of our Becoming a Microsoft Azure Administrator seminar series. Thank you everyone for joining us on this fun journey as we learned with Tim. And thank you, Tim, for teaching all of us.
You're most welcome, Alyssa. Thanks, everybody. I look forward to staying in touch. There's my Twitter handle at the bottom, Tech Trainer Tim. I'll put another link to my Excel sheet up on Twitter in the next few minutes.